Hey, good evening. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Lisa. I am your host of Happy Hour with Dr. Lisa. I've been waiting for this moment all day because you guys know how much I like to talk about all of my stories in psychology. And so I'm actually live on Instagram at Kids Can See Ghosts. Can you? I am also live on Facebook because my adorable mom can't figure out too well how to get on Podbean yet. And so she likes to see me on Facebook. So I'm actually live on Facebook now, and I believe that is public if you want to follow me on Facebook. If you have questions, you can always call me. The number is 765 205 1959. And you can email me at kidscanseeghosts@gmail.com. So I'm all over social media as well. So Twitter, let's see, what's the other one? TikTok. I don't do much with TikTok though. I post some things, but I'm just not into like dancing as much, doing those challenges, which I think is, a lot of what people do on TikTok. I just don't do that kind of stuff. Maybe I will over Christmas. I'm also on Twitter, and you can find the videos on YouTube as well. So I'm everywhere. So holler at your girl. All righty. When I was thinking about um, my blog, I was actually considering what I wanted to talk about when I did, you know, Haunted Kids. And this blog, which I believe is, let me go back down. I have it set up on another computer and it's just not working too well. When I created this blog, I was trying to debate as to how I wanted to answer some of the questions that I get about different psychology questions. And I don't think I've covered too much in psychology in reference to nebulous children. Those of you that follow the blog know what I mean by nebulous children. And so, what I decided to do after consulting with someone else is to just go back to the basics for Blog 26, meaning thinking like some of you. What does some of this mean? What are the basics? You know, and for example, why does this happen to kids? And so, there are a lot of questions like that I get from the public, and sometimes with parents, they're very confused. Why can my kid do this and I can't, for example? So I thought that's the perspective I would come from this particular blog, and this was back in August of this year. And so I saw a couple of the same questions coming in over and over and over again. And so I wrote about all of this on here. So let's deal with that today. More of the psychological component of this. And so I talk about, how the kids come to me. These are random kids. I tell you guys that all the time. These aren't kids that come to me by word of mouth, not these nebulous kids. And they are kids that I do not know. No affiliation with them, of course, because if I did, I wouldn't have been their therapist or, the psychologist to test them. I would have referred them out. I randomly pick these kids. So I haven't talked about this in a minute. So in community mental health, again, there's usually a really long waiting list. When the waiting list can be 6, 7, 8 months. Some mental health centers are so popular that the waiting list can be like a year. So when a kid gets to the top of that waiting list, if you are the person who's up next to treat one of these kids, then you pull them off the top of the list. So there's no way that I will even know that these kids could see ghosts just by randomly picking them off of the list. And so at one point in my career, it felt like the only kids that I have been seeing at that time are kids that can see ghosts. Okay. So this was all new to me. Each kid's experience was new to me. These are all kids who do not know one another. No affiliation. They weren't families, you know. These were just kids that I met that I had the opportunity to treat. These were children who I did not disclose that other children had that ability. You especially can't disclose to other clients about your current clients and what they can do and what their challenges are. Everything is confidential. So I'm preaching to the choir. I know most of you know that these things are confidential. So by sheer coincidence, these particular children kept coming to me. And so, having said that, it took me a very long time, years, to start talking about these kids publicly. And I'm so glad that I am, because so many of you are reaching out and telling me your own stories. And I think I wrote up some of your stories on the blog. In later blogs, you'll see them beyond blog 26. I'm going to do that again because now I have even more stories. And I'm happy that you guys don't mind me sharing them, but I do share them without names. So I keep you guys confidential. So I'm really happy to do that. So let's go back to the basics. So now you know, if you haven't heard that from me before, how these kids came to me. I just didn't expect it. It's as simple as that. I didn't expect it. You don't go to school for psychology and think that you will work with a bunch of kids that can see ghosts. And I'll just share with you all that ironically, I just met another kid who can see ghosts. Another one. And I'm not going to write about that one for quite a while because I like to space these things out in years to make sure everything's confidential. So I hope you guys understand that. But as soon as I heard a couple of things that this child said to me, you should have seen my face. I was like, oh, I was wondering when this was going to happen again. So, yeah, that's an interesting story, but we'll talk about that maybe sometime next year. For now, parents want to know, and some of you who aren't parents want to know, how does seeing ghosts happen to children? How does it happen? The funny thing about that is, I don't know why some kids are blessed with this ability and some kids are not, right? I don't know. I will tell you what some parents have told me. And these are parents who can actually see ghosts themselves. And so some of the things that they have told me is that just like their kids, they have been seeing ghosts from a very young age. Very young. Some of them were like kindergartners telling me, well, when they were in kindergarten telling me, hey, I remember a ghost would sit with me in class because I was scared to go to class. So some of the parents were like, I recall seeing ghosts as far back as, being a little kid. Some teenagers said the same thing. I've been seeing ghosts for a long time. You know, collectively, they all say the same thing. This is not something that they really want to do because it can be scary. And it's very difficult to control, although not impossible. And these were from parents who, over the years, learned how to control this gift. And these were teenagers who had adjusted to it, maybe your older teenagers. And so this was a gift that allowed them to teach me about what was considered good to them and what was considered bad. So good ghosts to them were white, meaning that they glow white, not race. They glow white, or they were of God. Bad ghosts were dark angels or demons, and they were just very dark, sometimes visually. Although, you guys know that demons can also appear as white angels. Because remember, not all white angels are what? Of God. So, one mom said to me that she, and this was child B's mother, that she didn't necessarily know why some kids can see ghosts or why she could even see ghosts. But what she would tell me was that she believes that for some reason, children are very divine, and I believe that as well, and the closest things to God. And sometimes the veil is lifted off of some kids, and for the rest of us, life experiences takes away the ability to see ghosts. So that was her perception of why Some children see and some don't. I actually heard that a few more times from other parents, and even from parents whose kids can see ghosts, but they couldn't. Their conclusion was their kids have been seeing ghosts for a long time, and that for some reason they were able to do it, unlike some of their other kids who weren't. It just happened, and they don't know why. They continued to see them for years, but they could. And so, to them, it was just a way of life. And it seemed pretty normal to the older kids, you know. Sometimes with the little kids, you know, it gave them some symptoms of mental illness, such as I told you, anxiety was very popular. And then there were some kids that I would see who would actually take on the demands from the darker angels, telling them what to do or commanding them to do things that they shouldn't. So it just depends. Now, how they get that ability, we may never figure out. Even if I conducted a huge research study on it, we may never figure out why, this happens to some kids. But it's really important to make sure that it doesn't offset their brains, meaning cause symptoms of mental illness. And so when that does happen, that's when they sometimes lose control of their own mental health and they need to be seen by someone. And I've talked about that plenty of times, so I won't bore you and, talk about that again. Some parents wanted to know how they can stop their kid from seeing ghosts. And when I think back outside of this blog to all of the writing that I've done, there may have been, one kid who really wanted to rid themselves of this ability. And I can still see the kid's face. This kid just really didn't want it because it's scary. I didn't necessarily get kids who didn't want to see ghosts, but what I did find is that a lot of them were afraid of the ghosts that they can see because, I mean, if these ghosts are dressing up as characters that you and I would be afraid of, like Jason in the movies, God knows, or Pinhead. Some of you are old enough to remember Pinhead. Don't dress up as Pinhead in front of me because I'm running. I'm running away. So imagine if some of these demons are, uh, changing themselves into things that these kids are afraid of. That would cause some anxiety because they don't know how to deal with it. And then sometimes, like I remember a little boy who told me that he would go down the hallway, and I can't remember exactly. This may have been a kid that I haven't even spoke of yet, but I'll tell you, I remember this story very clearly. That this little boy told me that there was a man walking down the hallway of his home and he had on a top hat. Remember how they used to dress in the early, 19th century when they would wear top hats and black suits, kind of like Abraham Lincoln? That's what he described. And he said it would walk up and down his hallway at night and it had chains and he wouldn't go out in the hallway at night, not even to pee, because he said that's what he would see when he would go in the hallway. And so you see how, even though they don't necessarily want to get rid of the ability, they do want to learn to control it, and it can be scary. I mean, I can't imagine waking up in the middle of the night and seeing something like that as an adult without being, afraid or nervous or trying to figure out how to get rid of it. So basically, it was more from the parents and the kids like, well, what do we do? How do we make this? How do we make this normal? How can they see ghosts without being scared and without developing symptoms of mental illness? Because I didn't meet one parent who could actually stop it. People that see ghosts as adults saw them as children, so it's something that they kept for a lifetime. I know adults now who see ghosts and they say, yeah, I was actually talking to somebody last week, at my job about the ability to see ghosts. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, these are the visions that I have all the time. You just have to learn, how to control it, meaning when you want them to come to you and when you don't. And when they come to you when you don't want it, how to get rid of them, right? And make them go away. But they will always come to you. Um, you know, what I do say to parents psychologically is that, and this goes for all kids, not just nebulous kids, all kids. You always have to monitor what they do. One of the things that used to really irk me about some of the parents of kids that would see ghosts is that they would ignore the ability, and that means that they would ignore the symptoms of mental illness that some of these kids would have when they were present to me. And I would kind of say, well, you didn't see that your kid was cutting themselves? I mean, how do you not see that? Are you not monitoring your kids? You have to be in sync with your kids to know when this is getting out of hand. You know, there shouldn't be any ghosts in your kid's life that takes over like that and tells your kid, I want you to start cutting yourself because this is the right thing to do to get your mother's attention. I've had that too. And so that shouldn't be happening with these kids and parents not knowing about it. And I used to get so irked by things like that because they would come to me and they would say, my kid has some patterns here. Well, of everything that your kid can do, you didn't notice that your kid was cutting? Come on. You know, there are no perfect parents. I'm not a perfect parent, but some things in your child's life have to be monitored. Your kids coming to you telling you, I'm afraid of the closet at night, or I'm afraid to go down the hallway. Get up and figure out what's happening, you know. And there were some parents who would just ignore these things, and it would build and build and build with these kids to the point where they have a catharsis, they have a breakdown, and then they would come and see me or come and see some of my colleagues, you know. So you may not be able to stop this in children, but you definitely can control it. You can definitely teach them how to control it. Let's see. Another question. When does seeing ghosts happen to a child? When does it happen? You know, a lot of parents that I've worked with, and it can be different for other parents, but of the ones that I've worked with, they've told me that they've been seeing ghosts for years. I just mentioned that. And if you watch animals and babies, you will see that they have some ability to see ghosts as well. And so there were parents who would tell me when they were little, for example, it would look as if like or they even when they would watch their children when they were babies, it would look as if they were daydreaming in a corner. You guys have seen babies do that? Now, Nebulous parents would say when their kids would behave that way, they could see what their kids were seeing. Isn't that incredible if you think about it? Because I know when my kids were babies, I used to always joke and say, oh, my kids are looking at the angels. My kids are looking at the angels, and they just wiggle and laugh and smile. You guys have seen babies like this. Well, these parents, who I call nebulous parents or parents who could see ghosts, will actually see what their kids were seeing. And they would, to themselves, they would say, oh, my kid sees a ghost, or my kid has been seeing a ghost since my kid was a baby. So a long time. So when it happens pretty early, according to them, um, because they would say that, you know, they're seeing ghosts when they're little. We just lose it as we get older. Um, and that is the end of that. Okay. Why does it happen to children? Why does seeing ghosts happen to children? Um, I honestly, I did not really learn why it happens. You know, that's a common question. As you can see, it comes in different ways. This is another one alluding to, you know, the perspective that I've gotten, you know, having worked with these children. And I'm not sure why it happens. I'm not even sure if there's a psychological basis for it to happen. Some people like to talk about schizophrenia and how individuals with schizophrenia can actually hear voices, or sometimes they have visions, they can see things. Others, you know, tactile or touch. olfactory hallucinations, which, by the way, olfactory hallucinations can be more medical. So you want to see a physician if you have all olfactory or nasal hallucinations. So I like to think of it in terms of, let's see, how do I put it? I think personally that some psychological conditions go hand in hand with seeing ghosts. One that I always think about is schizophrenia. We do have evidence that there are some anatomical differences in the brain, in a part of the brain for individuals with schizophrenia. But when I think about all of the years that I've actually watched that condition in different stages of my career, along with individuals that can see ghosts, some of the symptoms just correlate. They just do. So, if I was not as well versed in mental illness, I would probably agree with all of you and say there's something to schizophrenia and seeing things, because I get it. I completely get it. And I question it too. I used to walk into many hospitals, and there would be people in the hospital who, and let me clarify, this is a mental health wing of a hospital, and there would just be people maybe in the hallways just talking to something, right? Something that I couldn't see. Now, most, physicians or psychiatrists and psychologists will say, yeah, they had schizophrenia, so they were hallucinating. Or, yeah, they had his schizophrenia, so they were paranoid. But to me, it didn't necessarily look that way, if it made sense. It looked like my kids who could see ghosts. Remember how I mentioned how the kids could talk to ghosts internally without me? Obviously, I can't hear the response from the ghosts that they see, but you can't hear the voices that schizophrenics can hear either. Only they can hear it. And so I can see in my mind both instances where they just reminded me of each other. And psychology is a science, and if I really wanted to do some research, I would probably try to do some research in schizophrenia and tapping more into it from a paranormal perspective. Because I really want to know, like some of you, why does it happen? Why are there some people who can see ghosts and other ones we can't? And is it truly mental health? Is schizophrenia truly mental illness or not? We say it is, but it definitely mimics a lot of what I've seen in some conditions in mental illness. All right, let's see. Oh, I want to tell you this too. A lot of you get really excited about wanting to see ghosts. When it happens to kids as they get older, they will tell you you don't want to do that because it's scary. It's scary to them. It can be pleasant, but it can also be scary. So they would always tell me, imagine what it's like to just walk down the hallway and you see people. And they say, now add dark angels to it. Really, really scary ghost. Or if you see your family in the room and out of the blue, you see a scary ghost in the corner while everybody's kind of congregating in the room, and it's looking at me and it wants to say something to me, and I'm really scared of it. Right? These kids are not always thrilled to see ghosts, or at least they weren't when I was, the person that I was talking to, the child I was talking to recently, was really scared, very scared about what she said she saw in her house. TBA on that one, but it can be scary. Another common question that I get psychologically about these kids is, will my child be haunted forever? And I didn't add this, but how does it impact their mental health? Well, I personally don't believe that kids are haunted. It's easy for these parents to think that simply because they're watching their kids and they've been through it. Some of them, the ones who can actually see ghosts. So, are they haunted? No, no. This usually comes when they think that their children are possessed. And when they think that their kids are possessed, they want to know, is it something that will stay with them for the rest of their life? Um, my answer is always no, but I'm not a Catholic priest. I'm a psychologist. And so I answer more from the psychological perspective when I get those kind of questions. And I get that possession question a lot. And to parents, in their defense, it seems as if when this happens, there is no end to it. If you've never seen a kid that's possessed, it can be really scary to parents as well. I would give you a public example, but I actually might do that on my blog as opposed to doing it on a podcast. I have the perfect public example of a possession in a child happening right now. So I might actually do that on my blog this week. Um, a kid that can see ghosts is not haunted. They have an ability to do it, just like a lot of you. Okay. And it's not something, these aren't kids that you have to be afraid of. So stop using your imagination. So you don't have to see a kid. And if a kid tells you that they can see ghosts, like a little person just told me this week, you don't have to look at them and go, are they glowing or not? Can I see through them or not? Is there a ghost inside of them or not? And I think people do that too because it's really hard to understand how these kids can do it. I don't actually know how they can do it. I just dealt with them when it became a problem psychologically. And so the cool thing about these kids is when they do have the ability to see ghosts, they can distinguish between which ones are good and which ones are not. So they can sit there and tell you that's a dark angel, for example. And they can tell you that angel is of God, or no, don't deal with that angel, or Dr. Lisa, there's one behind you and she is of God and she's waving to me, or he's in the tree, he's of God. I mean, they just have it kind of down to a science on their own, or that one right there is my friend and that one changed to Freddy Krueger last night. I mean, I've heard it all from these kids. And I always again say to the parents, no, your kid isn't haunted, your kid just has an ability to do this. And then, they also had a power to make it go away and control it. And that's what we have to teach them because it starts impacting their, psychological functioning or their cognitive functioning, if you will, as well. Because in school, they get distracted. I can't tell you guys how many kids I've worked with who go to school and say, and come back to me and say, it just would not leave me alone at school, it's following me on the bus. It was in the hallway. I looked down the hallway, it's standing next to my locker. This thing will not leave me alone, and no one can see it but me. And then you also have to do an assessment of these kids because you want to make sure that what you're dealing with is not, for example, a psychotic disorder. So it's not that you listen to this stuff and you just go, oh, they have symptoms of mental illness because they can see ghosts, right? You actually have to, if you are in the field of psychology, you still have to assess the situation. So I always go back to the little girl who used to go out in the forest at night. I mean, clearly, she shouldn't have been going out in the forest at night. She shouldn't have been following the ghosts that she saw that would tell her to come, into the forest at night. That's what she was doing. She's like, I'm going out there because my friends are calling me. They're not your friends. It was dangerous. So obviously that was disclosed to her mother. So you are always a clinician first, right? While you're listening to these stories, you still have to be a clinician. So it took a lot of work for me to understand over the years how to combine both. How to combine both. Um, When do you take your kid to see a psychologist over this? That's a good question. You know, when the parents would come to me, even the parents who could actually see ghosts themselves, they would come to me or bring their kids to me when they felt as if they were parents who could see ghosts and their kids could see ghosts too. They would start coming to me when they felt like it was getting out of hand with their kids. So, for example, let's go to child A. If you've read about child A, child A's parents could not see ghosts, child A could. But child A was spending more time with ghosts than he was with children. That's one thing. The other thing was child A started listening to what those ghosts were telling him to do. So he was tantruming with his parents. They told me to do it. He was not doing schoolwork. My friends told me not to do it. They're always the kids' friends. And started misbehaving at school. And the parents, both parents, mom and dad, knew that this kid was declining and brought the kid to me. And then I found out that this kid actually could see ghosts. I started talking to him about the ghosts and getting a better idea of his symptoms from his perspective of seeing ghosts. And what I found with that child is, yes, he was caving to everything that they were telling him to do, every single thing. And so it had gotten to the point where he was becoming such a behavior problem in multiple environments. So no matter where they took him, school, church, home, he would always say that these ghosts were telling him to do these things, including not to talk to me. And that story is written on my blog. And so his symptoms grew, as opposed to getting better. Because, see, these kids can still see ghosts and function psychologically just fine. Child A was not functioning psychologically just fine. His symptoms grew and grew and grew, and he became a very mean child over time to other people because he said that they were telling him to do these things. He was very clear. So parents are fully aware of when their kids need to see a psychologist or a therapist or a social worker. It's just a matter of doing it. And so, again, kids can have this ability, but then really need to, have their symptoms put in check. And a part of putting their symptoms in check is simply teaching them how to control their gift, which is something I had learned to do over time. I didn't put this on here, but a common question, and I get this question a lot, and I've addressed it a lot. But if you've been listening to me, you already know that I don't necessarily like talking about dark angels. Kids call demons dark angels. So I don't necessarily like to talk about it too much because I don't believe in giving them, what I call notoriety or demonic notoriety. But I'm going to talk about this again because I had a question come in, and it's a popular question. Maybe every couple months I will get the same question about dark angels. So I'm going to explain that. I do have a blog on that. You can read it. Every kid that I worked with that can see ghosts called demons dark angels. And I mentioned that that's interesting because this stuff happened to me years ago. So these kids are grown now, but now you have all these shows coming out. For example, I talked about this before, Lucifer. If you haven't seen Lucifer, it's actually really good. But Amenadon, I talked about this before, who's Lucifer's brother on the show, opened up his wings one day. And I was like, oh my God. That's exactly how the kids describe dark angels. That they had wings just like God's angels and that they were dark. They were black. Amenadon's angel, I mean his angel wings. Amenadon was an angel on the show Lucifer. He opened up those wings and they were dark. And I just looked at the TV like almost as if it was confirmation bias for me, because remember, some of this stuff was hard for me to believe too. But because it was happening so much and with so many kids, I had to start believing it and working and trying to change my thought processes and study so that I can help these kids like I was ordained to do. So years later, here we are in 2021 with all this technology, and I see all this stuff and I'm looking at it like, that's exactly what the kids told me. They told me that it looks like an angel, and they call them dark angels, and that's why. I remember a little boy when I was in St. Louis, another little boy. It's always little boys. um, I don't even know if I told you guys this, but I was walking down the steps with this little one, taking him back to his parents. And he stopped and looked out of the window and he said, look over there, Dr. Lisa. And I'm looking and he's like, look over there. And I'm like, what? Because of course I don't see ghosts. So I'm like, what are you looking at? And he's like, it's a dark angel on the roof of that building and he's looking right at you. He's looking, look. Because kids used to treat me as if I could see ghosts too, and I can't. And I would go, just tell me, just tell me what you see. And I remember, like, if I close my eyes and remember what that kid told me, that it had dark wings, just like Amenadon on Lucifer, and it had on black clothes, maybe like a black suit, and it was standing on, in a city how buildings are closer together. It was standing on top of one of the buildings and it was watching, because one thing that was consistent about every single kid that I worked with, they would say, demons don't like you, Dr. Lisa, which is interesting to me in and of itself. But it was every single kid. So when this kid said, look out the window, and it was staring at me, in my mind, I had already said, okay, it's staring at me because it doesn't like me, as if I really care, but okay. Now, this is what the kid said to me, and as we walked down the steps, this kid was like, it's out there now. It's out there. It's right there. It's looking at us. It's looking at you. It doesn't like you. So that was something that I consistently found would occur with these kids. And I forgot to tell you guys this too. A lot of times when I would pull these kids off of the waiting list, I didn't know they could see ghosts. Obviously, if the parents knew, they weren't writing it on the intake forms. My kid is here because my kid can see ghosts. Most of them wrote all the symptoms that, would allude to some form of mental illness. So it's just the opposite of what some of you write to me about. They don't write on those intake forms, my kid can see ghosts. They write the current symptoms that their kids are having, such as sadness and, worry behavior and defiance and being oppositional at school and low grades and, poor test scores and fighting, physical aggression, or my kid was the victim of bullying or domestic violences in my home, or, we're homeless. So all of the symptoms. So most of these kids, I mean, some of the older kids would tell me, but most of these kids, I had no idea they could do this until they disclosed it to me. Or I saw signs of it, like I did the child recently. I saw signs of it and would get curious about it, but I wouldn't ask them. Just like the little kid this week who I was kind of giving a side eye to, like, okay, here we go. I think this is a nebulous child. Let me keep this to myself, right? But in the back of my mind, I said, if this kid tells me one thing that I already know that's around me, based upon working with kids who could see ghosts for many years, then I'm going to know this is a nebulous child, right? So this is not something that you just come out and you ask kids, hello, can you see ghosts? Not even with individuals with schizophrenia. Most of the time, they have the symptoms there already, and you can see them, and it's abnormally impacting their lives or messing with their, activities of daily living. That's some of the psychological language. So psychology is always a study of the mind. It's a science. Psychologists are scientists. We do a lot of research. The field is emerging, it's changing, it's different than what it was last year. There are so many research articles about individuals that can see ghosts. If you get bored and you're really curious about this topic, go back as far as you can and look for this stuff yourself. I had to do it too, and I actually did it recently because I said, I wonder when this is going to happen to me again. And this week it kind of happened. I don't have confirmation yet, but it kind of happened. And so sometimes I'll just sit and read stuff to just kind of brush up on my own skills. And if you look up paranormal psychology, it's been around since the beginning of time. People have always talked about how they can see ghosts. There are accounts of, ghostly visitors in different places and different situations on the playground. There are couples, like I work with plenty of couples that could see ghosts, and then their kids saw ghosts as well. So if you get really curious about this stuff and how long this has been going on and what paranormal psychologists do, and you like history, just go back and look at the history of some of this stuff. The psychologists have been dealing with this for years. It's just a coincidence that I did. I didn't ask for it, and I certainly didn't study it. Then, on the other hand, you have some psychologists who deny that children and people can see ghosts because we can't prove it, right? We can't necessarily prove it. And so, of course, if it's not something that they can prove scientifically, then it doesn't exist. And I call bullshit because it does exist. Okay. And so they'll say that it's something like a delusional disorder or, some forms of, paranorma. I can't talk today. It's late and I've been working all day. Some form of, paranoia. That's what I'm trying to say. And so, they attribute these challenges to, something psychological, but for me, the reason that I don't necessarily attribute it to, science or, it being mental health is because I've seen it too often and I hear about it and I encountered it and I had to treat these kids, and these kids weren't hospitalized and they weren't on medication under my watch and care. And so what did it for me personally was that no matter where I went out of the country once and had a kid talk to me about the angel in the tree, which I haven't written about that experience yet, being out the country. So that is why I believe those kids. They had the same symptoms. They had the same fears. For example, parents, when they were younger, had some of the same symptoms that their kids did. This happened in different situations at different times. These were random kids. This was not word of mouth. It wasn't just black kids, white kids, Asian kids, Latin kids. It was all kids, because you certainly don't discriminate in psychology. At least you shouldn't. And if you do, you need to stop. You need to work with, all populations of races of people, and it wasn't just all boys. It wasn't all girls. Now, I will say, I work with a lot of boys, and I still do. And it's because of the different conditions that I treat is more common in boys. But I have seen some girls, and I've seen some parents. So this stuff was just at random, And again, I had to learn how to deal with it. So I never had any warning. Like, no, sometimes when you read the backgrounds of kids, there'll be some things written over time about, some of the, not just the mental illness, but some of the things that the kids have said to other people. Every now and then I would get that. Twin flames, I was able to read some things like that. But with most of these kids, I had no indication that they can do this. So this was completely something that happened. Because it happened all of the time, one of the things that I've said this a million times, one of the things that I always promised these kids I would do is that I would definitely talk to all of you about it one day. And that's what I'm doing. And it's on behalf of children. These children get scared to tell people about their ability. So here I am, and I'm talking about it. So, in conclusion, I don't have all the answers about this. I haven't done any research in this because it doesn't need any research as far as I'm concerned. A kid tells me they can see ghosts, I believe them until I know that they're lying to me. And that is easy to know and to learn and to tell them that they're lying about it. And I have done that. So if you do have other questions for me, make sure you ask me. I love it. Keep it going. And that concludes that blog, which was blog 26. The next couple of blogs, I actually get in a little deep about how I grew up in psychology. And I thought this was important, so we'll start talking about that next week. My journey in psychology did not start in Chicago. It actually started in Nashville, Tennessee. And I probably need to write that, and I haven't. I always start with Chicago, and that's because I got my doctorate in Chicago. Really, my journey in psychology started in Nashville, Tennessee when I was in undergrad, when I majored in psychology, and then working with Nebulous Children, I started to encounter in Nashville, actually, before any of it. So I will clarify that next week. Until then, thank you very much for joining me. It's always like 500 people so far joining me. And so I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate it. So thank you so very much. And you guys have a great weekend. Bye bye.